President Schreiner, members of the board, each year we have to do a 5-year forecast 2 times during the fiscal year. We do it once in October, and then again we do an update in May. So this is the first 5-year forecast that's being presented to the board for the 2018-2019 school year that goes through 2023. First thing I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about 3 basic things about this forecast. We have our revenue highlights, our expenditure highlights, and then overall revenues, expenditures, and how that affects our cash balance. Our revenues are primarily come from 2 different sources, property taxes and state funding. 98% of all of our funds come from those 2 sources. So it's appropriate to talk about those 2 in a little bit more detail and not worry so much about that little 2% one. So we're going to start off with property taxes. 38% of our revenues come from property taxes. What this slide depicts is how reappraisal affects our taxes. So some people think, when appraisal goes up or goes down, it's going to affect our collections. What this shows is because of House Bill 920, those passed back in 1976, there was a reappraisal done in 2011. At that time, our property values decreased by roughly 8%. And then, again in 2017, our property values increased by 12%. Now, there wasn't a corresponding increase in tax revenue because of those 2 things. There wasn't a corresponding tax decrease as a result of those things. Really, there's a smoothing effect that happens because of reappraisal on how this red line works with the effective millage rates. To go back to 2011, our effective millage rate before reappraisal was 31.24 mils. After reappraisal, you can see it popped up to 34.11 mils. There was an increase of 2.87 mils. Because the values decreased, the millage rate had to increase to collect the same amount of taxes. In 2017, before reappraisal, the effective millage rate was 34.82 effective operating mils, and then it dropped down to 30.9 effective mils, a decrease of 3.92 mils. So basically what that means, like I said earlier, is our tax revenue stays roughly the same. The real purpose of reappraisal is to equalize the tax burden throughout different residents, different property owners, businesses throughout the school district, and so everybody's actually paying their fair share. So they take into account how all properties fluctuate in value, and they reassess that millage rate to collect roughly the same amount of money. We did receive some additional funds due to our 3.85 inside mills, generated roughly $2 million, and it's reflected in the forecast, half of that in 2018 and the other half in 2019. This next slide is a pretty important slide. It shows you where our effective millage rates rank in Franklin County. So this shows Class 1 real estate, which is residential and agricultural, so what our homeowners pay for property taxes in Franklin County. If you look at this column here, this is all levies included. It would be your operating levies, your permanent improvement levies, your bond issues that you have in place. This one in the middle is just operating mills, so it's just what you operate your pay your bills with on a day-to-day basis. That's what that middle column is, and this last column is the expenditure per pupil column. I'm going to focus mainly on this first column. We're currently 12th out of 16 school districts in Franklin County as far as what our millage rate is. This does not include, as you know, there's some new levies that are on the ballot right now, and I'm only going to talk about ones that are going to increase people's taxes. As you know, the one that we have on the ballot right now is a no new millage bond issue, will not increase taxes at all, so ours will stay roughly the same. One passed in May in Gahanna is going to be an additional 5.5 mils, so Gahanna is going to bump up ahead of us on that list. Also proposed in this November, these are all increases from other schools in the county. Not all of them are below us, but there is one that's below us on this list. You have Dublin's asking for a 5.9 mil operating levy. That'd be an increase. Grandview Heights has a 6.84, which is 1 mil of operating and a 5.84 increase to their existing bond millage rate. So it's not all a no new millage tax increase there. Whitehall has a 3.41 mil levy on the ballot. It's 2 mils of operating and 1.41 mils of bond. Worthington has a 2.9 mil new incremental levy, and that will have 2 mil increments for the next 3 years, bringing it up to a total of 8.9 mils. So we are getting a very good bang for our buck. I like to show people this on how we tax our residents here in Southwestern City Schools. We're currently 12th. If including the one that's already passed, and if the Whitehall one passes, or not the Whitehall, the Gahanna and the Grandview Heights, when those, if the Grandview Heights pass, we'll drop down a couple more. So just to briefly talk about this last column, the expenditure per pupil, this is old information. I've shared this before. We don't have the updated fiscal year 2018 numbers, so these are fiscal year 2017, but we currently rank 14th out of 16 districts in Franklin County as far as what we're spending per pupil. So we're getting a good value out of the dollars we have, and we're actually spending a little bit below the state average. We have very efficient buildings. We have a nice business model that we run here, and we're providing a good value for the dollars we spend. Moving over to state funding, this is the other 60% of that 98% of operating revenues that we receive. How schools are funded in the state of Ohio is you look at the number of students you educate, you plug them into a formula, and it kicks out a number. I've talked about there's 3 basic kinds of funding in the state of Ohio, how districts are funded. One is a formula district, and it works exactly that way. You put the number of students in the formula, it generates a number, and that's what you're paid by the state of Ohio. There's some other districts that you put the number of students you have in your district, you put it in the formula, and the amount that the formula generates is less than what you received in fiscal year 2017. If that's the case, they're going to fund you up to the 2017 level, so they're going to guarantee that you at least get the dollars that you received in fiscal year 17, so they're guaranteeing that. The last type of district I want to talk about is a cap district. You put the number of students in the formula, generates a number, and it's above what the state can fund. So they're actually, these districts, which we are one, a cap district, through the formula it would show you to get one number, but they actually don't have enough money to pay that, so they pay you a lesser number. What that number is for us for this current fiscal year, we're roughly $9 million over the cap. So if you took off that cap, the district received $9 million more dollars. It would take a loss of roughly 1,500 students to actually get off the cap. So we're not going to lose 1,500 students. That's not going to happen. We have 22,000 students, and 1,500 aren't just going to disappear. So we'll be on the cap for quite a while. We've been on the cap for 6 years. And what that means as far as dollars and cents, if you added those 6 years together, it's roughly $73 million that this district would have received because if the cap was lifted. So I think those are important things to ponder as we think through. You know, we have a new biennial budget coming up here next fiscal year, and there'll be another one in the forecast a couple more years after that. These are things that we need to think about as, you know, as we're talking to our legislators and we're talking to our community, that, you know, we do have some issues here with some of these things, and it's things that we need to be talking about. I did put in the forecast a modest 2% increase. The last 2 years we've received a 5.5% increase and a 5.8% increase. That was the max that all districts could have. So we did get additional state funds, but we would have gotten far more state funds if the cap would have been removed. So I have projected a pretty modest 2% increase, but if that increase doesn't materialize, that's about a couple $1 million a year that we need to figure out where that's coming from. So just a little bit of a note on that it is a conservative number, but we need to be watching that closely. Switching to expenditures, wanted to note a few things that are in the forecast just from an assumption basis. Our personnel services, currently 80% of our operating funds go to personnel and benefits. That's normal in the school business. If you look at some other school districts, you'll see on some other school district webpage, they get up to as high as 90%. That can get a little dangerous if you get that high up into your operating costs on personnel and benefits. But we're right at 80%. That's a nice place to be. We do have agreements in place with two of our groups, our administrators and our teachers group. We have agreements in place through the end of this fiscal year, so we'll start a negotiation process here in the spring. And with our classified group, we have an extra year contract on that, so we won't start until 2020 with that group. Insurance benefits, still in the forecast. This Cadillac tax that's out there for the Affordable Care Act, it's roughly $2 million a year. It would be anticipated that that could be put in play. That wouldn't go into effect till January of 2022. We also, through our employee groups, worked through it, our health insurance committee, and did some changes to our prescription drug program. We went to a mandatory generic. We also switched to a more aggressive formulary to save our district funds. So I think that was a good thing. That was something that we worked on as a group. So we're always working together, trying to make sure that we're trying to save dollars and get our bottom line even and down farther. Other expenditures that I wanted to talk about, we have a win-win agreement that has been in place for many years. The previous cost of that was roughly $1.2 million a year. That is going away. We're reducing that payment by 20% over the next 5 fiscal years of about $250,000 a year. So it's going down and down and down. Our final payment will be May of 2021. So that will be the last time that we have to pay the win-win agreement. So really that $1.2 million that we were putting out every year won't have to go out anymore. So that's a good savings for us. Moving on to overall revenues, expenditures, and cash balances. As you can see, the blue lines are the revenues, the blue bars are the revenues, and the red bars are the expenditures, and the green bar is our cash balance. You'll see that soon in 2021 our expenditures start outpacing our revenues. Again, these are very conservative numbers. I try to put this in a conservative light to make sure that we're not getting surprised by anything. So it's very likely that we won't start deficit spending in that year. But you just have to be aware that if things kind of go as they're projected, that we will begin to deficit spend at some point. Our cash balance target is roughly 3 to 6 months of operating expenses. We're currently at 5 to 8 months, so we're in a nice spot there too. It helps us to absorb any changes that could happen in a new biennial budget, that we're not in a panic mode if something happens with an unexpected expenditure or an unexpected loss of revenue. We're in a really good spot to have that 5 to 8 months targeted cash balance. And also, when we go to the rating agencies, Standard & Poor's and Moody's and places like that, that's a best practice. They like to see that we have a good cash balance and that we're not, kind of living on the edge with those kind of things. So we're in a really good place financially. Not really that much has changed since the last financial forecast that I did. Just wanted to get you guys up to date and up to speed on where we are with our new 5-year forecast. The beauty of this 5-year forecast, just like the last several that we've done, you can see we're in the black all the way through the end of 2023. Our last operating levy that we actually had on the ballot was in 2009. At that time, we promised to be off the ballot until 2013. So we're way past that 2013 point. We're 5 years beyond that, and soon to be 6, and just really in a great spot with our finances.
Thank you for the update.